base camp is meditation. Everything starts from base camp. The psionic stuff starts when you get into meditation. Then you have to deal with it. Entities end up turning up. Yes, they'll work in weird ways. That's what they do. My trouble with Stephen Greer, who I'm sure is a very good guy. I mean, I know, trouble, is that, I don't know, he's got this sort of hippie view of extraterrestrials. I mean, I don't know. I mean, are they all cosmic hippies? What a lovely idea, I wouldn't mind having a flower power session with them at some point, Everything's peace and love and Woodstock. Are there any bastards out there? And he seems to keep saying no. Most of the universe is non-human intelligence, even if we're only talking about ordinary zoological stuff. Insect intelligence, other mammalian intelligence. We're surrounded by intelligence. That's not something we don't take on board enough. But it's not human intelligence. And we do a really bad job of interacting with that, let alone anything from anywhere else. But certainly 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, there were rituals in place. What those gentlemen are describing are ritual conditions, whereby these other things, these other energies, these other entities start to interact. Where it goes wrong nowadays, in my view, or where it's limited in modern terms in a very dangerous way, is that our predecessors always made sure they were protected. There were protection rituals that you had to do before any of this was undertaken. The first thing you do is cross-question the entity, and you make sure you know what you're dealing with, and that it's going to play fair and give you the truth as a response. Yeah, it strikes me that we're listening to people who've got this sort of gung-ho, kick-ass, modernist view that it's all modern. Let's get UFOs on the ground. But if you have that wonderful kids attitude, which I'm sorry, that's what it is, expect to run into dangers very quickly, because maybe that's what you think, but not the universe around you. That's not what the world around you thinks. I mean, there's too much trust in all of this. They are just machines. My mind is in that machine. Who made the machine? What's it for? What's it doing? Why are you inviting it into your space? Why are you having such difficulty getting in and out of it? These are questions that need to be asked before anything goes any further.
The following program is presented for general information, education and entertainment purposes only, and is not intended to be advice of any kind. The content, views, thoughts and opinions expressed in this program are those of the individuals involved. The use of information on this program is at the user's own discretion.
So Reverend Stu, what is shaking with you?
Oh, well, I'm up to my normal activities, which is exploring weird and wonderful phenomena, just reading about it. Not participating so much these days, but just more academic. That's normal for me. That's why I love this show, Mike, because these are the exact type of topics we explore here.
It's a wild ride, right? You never know where the conversation takes us. But I feel like the conversation is pulling us into the psionics. We've talked about that for a couple episodes now, and you have some interesting ideas about that.
Yeah, I feel like I can see some parallels between Dr. Stephen Greer's CE5 protocol, which is calling in entities or UAPs, and ancient magical rituals calling in angels or other types of entities. I'm sure you can imagine. Then what happened was we had a previous episode with Reverend David William Parry, where he mentioned he felt he could see some parallels between so-called alien abductions and ritual magic. So that's really piqued my interest. I put the two together, and I've thought this is the perfect guest to bring on today to explore these topics more deeply.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. But just to be clear, we're not suggesting that CE5 or psionics is ancient ritual magic, but what we are going to be doing is exploring potential commonalities between the two, right?
Yeah, that's right. Now, I haven't made up my mind about this, Mike, but I just felt like I could see some parallels, and I'd like to discuss that with someone else who I know is well informed on the esoteric side of things.
Awesome. So welcome one and all, wherever and whenever you may be. This is Universal Disclosure, meeting the moment. My name is Mike, an active UFO field investigator in Southern California, with my friend and co-host,
Reverend Stu in Melbourne, Australia.
And today we are, well, why don't you just do the honors?
All right. Once again, Universal Disclosure Podcast proudly welcomes Reverend David William Parry.
Reverend David, welcome back, and thanks for visiting with us again. It's great to see you.
It's always good to see both of you. You're both good friends of mine. Nowadays, you know that. I mean, Stuart's a proper friend in the sense that I can be rude. Therefore, you know you're getting somewhere. You know you're getting somewhere. Mike's a new chum of mine. I mean, he's got this terrible disability of being American, but no one's perfect.
Don't hold it against me.
I wouldn't hold it against you. And no, it's lovely being back. Our special relationship is much better than the special relationship between the United States and England and Britain, because it works. No, it's lovely being back to see you both again, and for an interesting chinwag.
Yeah, this should be definitely an interesting conversation. So I have a couple of frame building questions, as it were, and each one will sort of build upon each other to lay the framework for our overall conversation. And we've been talking about psionics here recently, and the idea of calling in UAP, which is quite fascinating. And basically, the first question is, what is magic or a magic ritual, and what are its origins, and is there any real proof that it works?
The proof word. Let's begin with one observation about psionics, and I don't want to address that at the moment because I know that our conversation is designed to unfold as it should do. Psionics actually began, I did a tiny bit of research a couple of days ago, as a concept in science fiction, of course. And it seems to, the 50s, 60s, 50s, 60s, the golden age of science fiction. I've never, the literature side of it, I've never been against science fiction as a genre. What I'm against is the appalling misuse of it. It's either just computer generated trash nowadays, or it's there for a hidden agenda. Oh, give it a rest. Or it's just ordinary stuff. There was a spaceship, there was a big fight at the end, and you think, well, is that it? But let's balance that against the fact, although of course they would probably have sent scientific romances, which is actually quite different, against H.G. Wells. I mean, that's pure science fiction. Against Jules Verne. I mean, these were giants, and they were visionaries. They weren't simply authors, although there's no such thing as a simple author, as we all know. I mean, in France, I remember reading some correspondence years back amongst the surrealists, where some of them thought H.G. Wells was an adept. I mean, his visions were so far ahead of his time that he can't simply have been a writer using his imagination. Although, of course, when people like that are using those terms, it gets very complicated and sophisticated indeed. In Victorian Britain, you've got war machines with heat rays struggling with the biosphere, the Earth biosphere, and eventually being destroyed by it. These are, people were driving in carts. The local gentry would have had a horse and cart. The farmer would have had a wooden cart to move stuff around. So to have these sort of tripod machines prowling around and taking over, that was unbelievable. And the types of consciousness he was describing amongst the human protagonists, amongst the human characters, rather. Again, these are modern attitudes in a way that simply can't have existed back then. He's massively ahead of his time. Actually, I love his short stories. I mean, like everyone else, I love The Time Machine, which he puts down to socialism, curiously, an ardent socialist. The short stories like The Shape of Things to Come, that really does, look and sound visionary to me. Or The Man Who Could Work Miracles. Let's take a real objective step out of history as we know it, to these angelic beings who are studying us. And one of them decides to introduce the power of miracles into human history. And what would be the outcome? So these are gigantic concepts ahead of time, so I can understand that. therefore, there are exemplars in science fiction, science romances of what we're all talking about, that sort of visionary impulse. Um, but they're too few and far between. I think the whole psionics thing is an example of that. I mean, what they tended to mean back in the day is the occult powers of the mind. Now, there's an interesting turn of phrase. That somehow human subjectivity could generate unknown or extremely rarefied energies, which could then be utilized not only by the practitioner, but also in machinery, with machinery. At the risk of dragging Nazis back into it again, I blame Stuart. It always happens on these shows. I mean, that's not really original because that's what the Nazis were trying to do. Um, so it's good to say it appears in science fiction 50s, 60s, but it's not good to say that those ideas are in any sense original, although there's a whole bedrock beneath that of what's wrong with those ideas and what's right with those ideas, which leads me into the question. Is magic real? Yes. Is there proof? Yes. Um, I used to know Sir Christopher Lee, who, when he wasn't running up and down staircases in an opera cloak, poor old Chris, he never got the parts he wanted. What can you do? And it wasn't that he was ashamed of all of that. He was always moaning about the fact people have never seen my range. Well, yeah, they haven't. Those are the parts you're being given because people love you doing those parts. There's not really a way round that, Chris. And it was. I'll let you into I hope I haven't said it on this show before. Excuse me, into a sort of an official secret. When he was doing Saruman in the Lord of the Rings, it was he was livid that most of his stuff, it wasn't all of it in the end, was cut out of the second movie. And it was known. Chris had a magical way of letting things become known. So in other words, his chums phoning each other that he was going to make a statement about it, about the outside the British Film Institute, and we all arrived. Talk about rehearsed. We all arrived to him stood outside the British Film Institute, ripping up his membership card, making sure the press got the photographs. With him saying he'd never been treated like it in his life. What's he got to do with them? They had nothing to do with the production of the movie. But I'm bringing all that up because, I mean, he was absolutely convinced in the reality of the occult. And he knew, I mean, Chris was quite an elite figure. I mean, he knew people not only in the Freemasons, he knew people in the police force, he knew people in the army, very highly placed operatives who not only had the evidence and were involved in various cases, but alerted him to the fact these things are an ancient and real and very, very powerful. What is magic? There are different theories. It's always been here. I don't like the simplistic, who is the guy that started it, when and where. That's a sort of Bible Belt. They hate me anyway. Bible Belt sort of falsification of history. This is the man because it's only 6,000 years old as a system and we can work out who did what. No, it's nonsense. That is an alternative history. That's an alternative narrative of history. Therefore it can be assessed by the mainstream for all of its flaws and all of its strengths. It has more flaws, in my opinion, than strengths. So magic has always been part of the human condition. It's seen as a way, I suppose, by our ancients and by ourselves of not only interacting with the environment, but also commanding the environment. I mean, cave communities, cavemen, cave women, and I'm sure they were lovely, didn't have the technological advantages we have, obviously. But they still had the human need to survive and thrive, and they needed to interact with the environment. They needed to know where to go for hunting. When it eventually got to crops, they needed to know about the crops, when to plant them, when to reap them, and so on. So they felt an interaction with the energies. I mean, let's use a modern word, the spirits, the energies, the consciousnesses, plural, of nature. That was, they felt they could interact with all of that directly. And they did that through their intuitions, they did that through their imaginations, through their fantasies, very different things. And therefore, it was really an involvement with the creative process. The creative process is not only in ourselves, but in life generally. There's a relic of that in British folklore. John Barleycorn, the life of the fields. You know, the farmers we were talking about. Farmers. You know, the farmers certainly do the sowing and the reaping, but the fields are alive. They're not just these dead mechanisms, they're alive. So, what is the life of the fields? Who is the life of the fields? How do we interact with the life of the fields? And he became known in Britain as John Barleycorn, which links us in with ideas of sacrifice, resurrection. You know, the old stories aren't history books in a simple minded sense. Certain modern practitioners of occultism, in those days, that would have been religious practice, of course. It wouldn't have been seen as separate from community life. There would have priests eventually arose, of course, shamans. Um, in what capacity did they arise? In my view, they were experts. You know, people dedicated themselves to a life of working with the energies, as the young huskies would have dedicated themselves to be defenders of the tribe, the young warriors, farmers dedicating themselves to raising the crops. You know, there were too few of us, and we were so vulnerable back in those days. We needed very heavy job distinctions, divisions of labour, and we needed to protect each other as far as we could. You know, if the tribe down the road hasn't been as effective in storing food for the winter, they will be gunning for us. A sad fact of human life until we begin to cooperate, but we haven't even learned that yet. You know, so these are survival mechanisms. These are acts of magic. They're acts of religion. Certainly, as human beings evolve, I do think that's the appropriate word. Things aren't what they were back in the past, and a huge amount has got better and progressed. You know, we must avoid this negative mindset about everything is ridiculous. A huge amount. I'm talking to two friends this morning on other sides of the planet. We're having a decent conversation. These things are miraculous to our ancestors. They couldn't even have dreamed that would be possible. You know, and we're too blasé about all of that. I think we're not thankful enough. You know, I mean, thinking of Big Al again, Aleister Crowley. I mean, he's right and wrong as usual. You know, for him, magic was always an act of will. He's right. All of these things are acts of will, but it depends in what context, in what sense. I mean, if it's will serving your own ends, that's classically black magic. If it's will towards a greater expansion of life, love, community, then that by definition is white magic. And that most certainly exists. I mean, it exists in psychology, psychiatry. It exists in parapsychology, which I don't think can be dismissed, because what they're trying to do. My trouble with parapsychology is most of the time it's asking the wrong questions, like ufology. And also, it ends up with the same results, which it never questions because it doesn't realise or doesn't want to admit was asking the wrong questions. You know, there needs to be a much more weirdly rigorous Cartesian mechanism at work in Freudian slip anthropology. I was getting to that. You know, in parapsychology, because they would benefit. You know, I think half of them are afraid they're going to end up with no reality behind all of these things. For me, that's a naive question. I don't know what you mean, no reality, because they're cultural events, they're personal psychologies. I don't know what you mean by that. But you know, don't be afraid, because anomalous phenomena are well known in all of the mainstream arts and sciences. Nobody says, I mean, you have to be a very brave person to say that never happens at all. And also, you really need proof to show that, because I think 99% of the human race does know anomalous phenomena happen. So, what are they? What's generating them? And yes, by definition, there's something paranormal, occult, supernatural to all of that. Anthropologists, of course, I got there in the end, study magic and the occult. They study it in the various non-Western societies that these sometimes immensely great scholars are participating in. They participate in the rituals, they participate in the religions, and for them it's part and parcel of research. It's not just oh, does it work? A dumbass question. Because a community's doing it, and the community does believe it works, or it wouldn't be doing it. I mean, if you've ever hung around with farmers, they're not time wasters. Here, time's money, So no, I mean, they're not interested in decorous folklore events. They want a profit margin. Farmers, they want a profit margin, and they're very hard-nosed businessmen. If you get people like that involved, something is going on. So yes, I think it's quite fair to say white magic and black magic as white occultism and black occultism, esotericism as psionics exist. They're real. I mean, are they measurable events? Curiously, the answer is yes or no. I mean, sometimes they can be. A lot of the time, they seem to resist the rather crude questions and measurements we're using for those things. Can you measure an anomalous phenomena in the sense you can measure a burst of electricity? Unlikely, I'd have thought, and it strikes me if anyone's trying to do that, that's probably the wrong way of looking at it. Because at the very least, anomalous phenomena are linked in with not only the individual human psyche, but also the collective psyche, the communal psyche. And it seems to be something to do with the subconscious, the unconscious. I might have said this on the show before, so I'll be brief. The unconscious, by definition, by what we mean by words, what we mean in words, is unconscious. We know nothing about it. We never will be able to. It's unconscious. That's the point. Whatever it's doing, and that's the vast majority of human experience. Whatever it's doing, and these things are something to do with that. Therefore, magic is an attempt, in my view, to not only collaborate with the forces of creativity, but also the forces of anomalous creativity, as and when they burst into the human sensorium, our world of senses as we know them, and our attempt to navigate through the meaning of all of that, which always tends to be either sacred, in other words, what did our ancestors mean by that? Something beyond human calculation. It belongs to the gods. We don't know what it is. We know it's powerful. We know it can crush us. We know it can lift us up to enlightenment, but we don't know what it is. So it's to the gods. It's something like that, or it's something that crushes us and grinds us down, and we have to be careful of it. Is that a good enough answer, Mike? What do you think?
I'd say so. Yes. Thank you.
Well, let me. Oh God, I'm digressing again. So shut up, David. We're also fighting against, we in the sort of collective sense, all of us, against the fact we're beings in a continuum that really we're at odds with in terms of cognition from the very beginning. And is that part of our education? Partly. Is it part of the human condition? Partly. I mean, these are big phrases. When you start using phrases like the human condition, if you look at what the scholars mean by that, these, there are whole books, there are libraries about what that phrase means. These aren't things to be thrown around lightly. I notice far too many people do nowadays, but okay, if you think you've done something, whatever. We actually are living at least in a continuum of 4 dimensions, which, of course, the Einsteinian mob is crowing about left, right, and centre nowadays. String theory and all the rest of it. So human beings have never actually been living in a 3D reality. We've always actually been living in at least a 4-dimensional reality. So the mystery starts there. Why is it we're perceiving the world around us in such a narrow way when all this other stuff in our lives is happening, and it's happening all the time, and it's part of our lives? Hinton cubes and all that sort of stuff. I mean, these are early attempts to start people thinking of, what is it like to think in 4 dimensions? That far from trivial questions, non-Euclidean geometry, far from trivial. Some people think that's the secret of the Freemasons. That's really what they were doing. If that's the case, how fascinating. Can you break ranks and tell us all? Because that would actually be extremely interesting. Certainly Crowley, and I don't want to spend too much time on him. He was aware. I mean, that guy was aware that all that was going on in esotericism, and his use of the tesseract as a symbol for thelema, the four-dimensional cube, is well known. How far he went with that is a different question, but he was aware all this stuff was going on. Bible Belt, I'm just about to say something nice. Curiously, one of the best people dealing with all of these was someone I rather admire in the Bible Belt. Passed on a year or two ago, Dr. Chuck Missler, who was into UFOs. The big no-no in the Bible Belt, because it's something to do with stuff that they don't really want talked about. Or if it is, it's all Christian, whatever that means. He would say, well, there's something going on here. We've always been interacting with these energies. We've always been interacting with entities from elsewhere. It's just what human beings do. It's nothing unusual. It's nothing new. And, if you think of what it would be for, say, again, a four-dimensional entity to make itself known in our 3D perceptions. I mean, what would that be like? I mean, what would it be like for the entity? Would it even know it was doing anything because it's doing what it's doing? Or is it just where we become aware of something and it passes through our 3D construction, then it passes away again? Is it just doing what it's doing and we think, oh my God, what's that? Then it's gone again. He used the example, a rather classic example of suppose a sphere wants to make itself known into a continuum of 2 dimensions. The classic reasoning of that type of geometry. So it begins as a point, it begins as a dot that expands. Then it becomes the sphere as it passes through the 2 dimensions. Will anybody actually realize it's a sphere, or will they just think it's a large circle? Then it goes through the 2 dimensions, and the circle gets small again, and back to the point, and it's gone. But they haven't really seen what it is, and they haven't really experienced what it is, and they've not really interacted with it in an appropriate way. Doesn't all this remind you of ufology?
Yeah.
And he was saying, therefore that is ufology. He was a very good scholar. I've got a lot of time for him. And that's also what's happening to the great faiths. And it's unwise to just push all that to the side, although nothing's happened, because there's a crossover here. As I say, I prefer the working title, the working word energy, because I think it's more modern, and we get to things like psionics, which do need discussing, because it's very much part and parcel of that world.
I'd quickly say that Jesus commanded the wind and the wave, so that's always been there in Christianity, that thread.
Oh, the incredibly misunderstood gospel stories. Yeah, 100% agree with you, Stuart. So what would I mean? That's an example, I suppose, if you're into psionics at a level of increased magnitude. So you could look at it in Hindu terms. The adept who's learned of his relationship with the continuum on a much deeper level and is able to interact with those elements of the continuum in ways we can't even imagine. You'd have to be another adept not only to receive an explanation, but also to be able to apply the mechanism. So he could sit in front of us. Doesn't that happen a lot in the gospel? And say, look, this is what I'm doing. And they're all waving their heads about because they don't really get it. And then he tries again and they don't get it again. But, I mean, this is an interesting example of someone that's us, but also something else, trying his best to say, look, all this other stuff's going on, guys, and that they sort of just don't get it, but they know it's important.
Yeah.
A better example, I suppose, for me, would be the resurrection body of our good Lord. That, I mean, no, if you think that's a ghost story, you've missed what's going on. And the disciples are that's what's freaking them out. It's very clearly not a ghost. So what is going on? There's a physical presence. I mean, doubting Thomas is given permission to put fingers in the revived body. not just a revived body, not just a reanimation. This would be not a new creation. This is the idea is misunderstood in so many ways nowadays. A resurrection means a full revival of what was before with nothing lost. So you're not looking at something less than, you're looking at something more than. So something very, these are strange stories. The luckiest man in human history, physical proof of the Saviour's resurrection. Put your fingers in my side. Actual physical proof, the luckiest man in human history, the only person in the Bible that gets physical evidence. And what does our Lord instantly say? Blessed are those who have faith. Blessed are those that haven't done that, and they've got faith. These are complicated assertions and must not be taken at face value. Why would that be better? Everyone in that room would have been perfectly aware of what had just happened. So why is that better? Is it something to do with our own internal development? Is that, again, another of those stories, another of those explanations that the disciples, the apostles, are struggling with because they can't really get what's going on there? Jesus passes through walls. Our good Lord passes through walls. He has a different relationship with the 3D reality. He passes through walls, but not by passing through a wall. They sort of react differently, and he's inside a room, then he's outside a room, and he can eat fish, and he's over there, but he's here at the same time, and it's not by location. It's somehow the same thing, and it's not the same thing. I mean, this was freaking out the early church. It wasn't making it rest easy. What is going on here? What is it to do with us? This is frightening. And there's no way around that. To the ancients, it was frightening. People nowadays home in on the moral imperatives, and good. I mean, it's time we did something about them, not just homed in on them. Feed my sheep, feed my flocks. So in other words, spread love and tolerance to the nations. What a beautiful thought. But that was really the message inside a greater vehicle, which was terrifying them. There's someone with a new relationship to all of this, and we don't understand. We know it's important, but we don't understand. And that puts the ascension in a different category. Is it some guy floating up in the air? That's actually not what it says. It's not what it's implying. Again, you're looking at a different relationship to our 3D reality. He's gone, but he's not gone. He's here, but he's not here. So all of these are questions that are deeply linked in with psionics and the modern practice of occultism under a different name.
That actually sounds a lot like some encounters that people are talking about with, for lack of a better term, the ETs, where the way that they move, they sort of float and they move like quickly, like they're here, then they're there, or they go through walls, or they pull people through walls. Not saying that Jesus was an ET or anything, but it just sounds very similar to some accounts that people have talked about who have had experiences with beings, not human.
Some people, of course, have said our good Lord's an ET. People would do absolutely anything not to do what he said. It's an ET. No, it's a mushroom. That's my favourite one. Our good Lord was actually that's my favourite one.
That's right.
A mushroom cult in the Middle East at the time, and the disciples are actually just highly out of it most of the time. And all of these. The fact that people are struggling with sacred stories is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. That's what we're meant to be doing. You're not meant to be sat in a pew. This is true because I've told you. Yes, Pastor. That's not the idea. You struggle with sacred truth. Otherwise, for you haven't really arrived at the sacred bit. I'm sorry, you just haven't. There's nothing new. There's nothing new under the sun. I mean, that old truism. What's new nowadays is let's get there. Let's get in there, guys. Is the philosophy surrounding all the philosophical assertions that ufology is buying into, which is a variant of an ideological modernism They're all stupid and simple-minded in the past. Everything's better and brighter these days. We're Democrats. We've got science. What did they know? All this is incredibly simple-minded. Yeah, and I've met ufology people that cannot talk about religion. It's what they did, our feared ancestors. But there's something duplicitous and ironic. They knew about it, but they didn't know what they were doing. Well, so if they knew about it, why didn't they know what they were doing? And maybe they knew more about it than you do, because they spent their lives, they had more leisure time for a start. So maybe they use their leisure time to learn about it more than you've done. Maybe you've got less leisure time than them. What did they know? I can't talk about it. Away, 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 away. It's silly. It's silly. And that, of course, is the assertion of modernism. And I'm known in this country for my resistance to the philosophy of modernism, not because I think it's got nothing to say. Sometimes its visions are beautiful. I mean, I remember as a lad, adverts on TV, black and white. How about that for dating me, Stuart? Yeah, my family had a black and white TV back in the day. You'd get these sort of futuristic, and the kids loved it. I loved it. You'd get the future car, and there'd be the little man and the little woman, and he'd always be, G.I. Joe in disguise, driving along this super highway, and she'd be the little fluttery, oh, Brad, as they're driving to sort of satellite city, and it always ended up, trying to flog up shoes or something. But it was great. It was absolutely great. My trouble with modernism isn't that sort of stuff, and it's not sci-fi. My trouble is it leaves out too much of human experience as a philosophy. It's like it wants to close its eyes to too much history, to too many other arguments, and to the human condition itself by reinterpreting, we're modern, we're mean, we're bright and shiny, by turning into a very narrow view, which somehow, because there's faith in that view, the faith that everything will get better. One look at international news should destroy that once and for all, if only that were the case. No, there's something wrong with the human condition. There's something far from narrow in the human condition. And these other views of life arose for reasons. And, the new kid on the block, modernism, there's something wrong with it. As I said, there's something limited. I mean, I'm going to make a philosophical gesture. I think it's safe to say there are two nodes, there are two polarities in philosophy since Nietzsche. There's Aristotle, who represents the traditional way, for want of a better way of putting that, of thinking, of reasoning, of discoursing. That here is a theorem. Let's gather evidence and muster arguments, and we'll look at what's against that, and we'll arrive hopefully at a conclusion. I mean, that's modern classical scholarship, that's academia, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. Or you get the crazed Nietzsche, who is so versed in all that, it's untrue. Therefore, he's a real problem. He's the enfant terrible. Big Al, you are not the enfant terrible. It's Friedrich Nietzsche. Who says, oh, yeah, come on, let's rip all that up and see what's really happening in life. And he does. I mean, the trouble is he does do that. So either you're on the side of the sober old Aristotle, or this young crazy guy that wants to look beyond good and evil, that wants to look at the Superman. What would it be like if we really saw the world as it was around us and lived in that way? Whoa, because that's what he means by the Superman. Nietzsche would not have been involved in weird politics. I mean, he hated Germans for a start, so that's a bit of a giveaway. For him, the Superman would have been someone like Picasso, a man devoted to art, on fire with creativity. That would have been the Superman for Friedrich Nietzsche. So those are the polarities, and I think people get worried about the Nietzschean option because it can go in so many directions, simply because everything's been torn up. Nietzsche's invited round the postmodernists, which I sort of count myself. They've been invited to dinner, and us lot know all the right wines, and we know all, everything to bring, and we know how to discourse. We can quote poets, but we've left the back door open for Nietzsche, who burns down the house. So because he can't resist. That's sort of a view of it all. Yeah, I mean, if we say there's more to ufology than ufologists want to admit, if we say there's more to human experience than most of us are comfortable doing, most people they want comfort, they don't want revelation. They want nice, normal, whatever that means, because there's nothing nice in the normal. Normally, is repetition kills people and gives them mental breakdowns. So you got to be careful of that. What they want is a bit of fun, enough money to pay their bills, a job that doesn't destroy them internally, some sort of family life. Why not? All these things are intrusions into that system, unless you're crazies like us three that want some answers, and we want it now. And the minute you start going down that route, you notice certain things. Certainly, ETs. I'm very comfortable with that phrase. Because the phrases mean something, but they don't mean anything. So why not? Why not ETs? They behave in ways that have been known to the great mystics from the year dot, from time immemorial. There would be nothing unusual in India for people talking about energies, entities, moving around in that way 1,000 years ago. There are yoga sutras, Patanjali. Who knows about the occult? Go to the Hindu boys. Because that's a continuous civilization. There are two continuous civilizations, India and China. Yeah, are there major interruptions? Of course there are. But, for all intents and purposes, they're continuous for thousands of years, something the West can't say, something actually no other country can say. So the fact that they systematized esotericism isn't really a surprise. They thought it was all something to, base camp is meditation. Everything starts from base camp. The psionic stuff starts when you get into meditation, then you have to deal with it. Entities end up turning up. Yes, they'll work in weird ways. That's what they do. But all of this has been catalogued and listed in India, and it's no surprise. I mean, the surprise would be in one of the great yoga schools. If you've been practicing serious meditation for 5 years, why isn't it happening? And then you'd have to have a long talk with your guru. Have you done your homework? I mean, it's sort of the other way around there. Yeah, I mean, ETs, biological entities. I mean, that's a way of trying to make things sound more modern. They're all biological. They are. I mean, whatever. Is a human being biological? Biological? Well, yes and no. And is that the interesting bit? Yes and no. You've got to be careful what it is you think you're asserting. I looked at the names you two gentlemen sent to me, and they struck me as obviously I knew Stephen Greer beforehand. I mean, he strikes me as an interesting guy. Don't get me wrong, but I mean, even he's sort of it's modern. It's modern. Yeah, why? Why do we have to do that? And I'm sure someone of his background in education is perfectly aware that there are direct parallels with other societies and other cultures which are very far from modern, which might lead us into other questions. So I'll throw the ball back into your court at that point.
Well, thank you, and a perfect tee up actually, because I wanted to sort of delve into that. So before I get to the CE5 protocol, I have sort of a lead up question. It is sort of postulated when doing that. Actually, hold on. I don't know how familiar you are with that. So just a quick recap. The CE5, as I understand it anyway, is a meditative state where you sort of ground the root of yourself into the core of the earth, and then you shoot your consciousness out to the far reaches of space to call in an entity. That's kind of the nutshell version of it. And the process of that is sort of said to be that you're really only going to be successful at that if you either have a certain level of consciousness within you already, or you've worked up to it, or you have like a positive type of intention with purity and love. And if not, generally speaking, you don't really get results, as I sort of understand it. So what do you have to say about that aspect of it?
Well, apart from it sounding like a song by Carol Carpenter, what was it? Occupants of Interplanetary.
Yeah.
And what could be wrong with Karen Carpenter? A saint. Um, you know, oh, uh, I don't mind all of this stuff. My trouble with it, it's so primitive compared to what the Hindu boys do. Or the Tibetan Buddhists. I mean, yeah, that's sort of 101. You're in class 101. You're making it up yourself as you go along, and you're stabbing and taking little footsteps. Let's go to the big boys. Let's look at what the Hindus are doing. Let's look at what the Chinese mystics are doing because they've been doing it for thousands of years. That's much more interesting. Yeah, I mean, I've heard of the protocols in my own humble experience. I've gone further than that. Um, just there's this weird modernist view of reinventing the wheel because they didn't do it back then, but they did, and they did it better, and it was more sophisticated and much more knowledgeable and got more results. Um, so yeah, I mean, I can see what he's doing with the protocols. I've no doubt they work. My trouble with Stephen Greer, who I'm sure is a very good guy. I mean, I know trouble. Is that I don't know. He's got this sort of hippie view of extraterrestrials. I mean, I don't know. I mean, are they all cosmic hippies? What a lovely idea. I wouldn't mind having a flower power session with them at some point. Everything's peace and love and Woodstock. Are there any bastards out there? And he seems to keep saying no. But surely the answer's a maybe. I mean, surely. I mean, again, let's look at human history. Let's look at an esoteric idea and an ET idea. ETs are coming to help us. So they're partly responsible for the balls up known as human history, then, are they? And rather like religious questions, they've got the capacity to help, they've got the intelligence and they've got the means, but they don't really help. So what's going on there then? I mean, don't throw that at religion, please, because those are religious questions, admittedly. They go straight into ETs. So why aren't the buggers helping? Um, you know, and you have to start asking. I mean, I saw one bit of footage a couple of years ago where there was these strange, weird images. What's it, Joshua Tree? He keeps photographing weird skyscrapers at Joshua Tree, and there was this bit of smoke that had come from a campfire, and he said it looked like some ET that keeps turning up in his astral form. And he said, "Look at this bit." Now my eyes aren't what they were, and it was on a screen, so But there was some guy with a sort of name, and he keeps turning up, and his forehead was about that big.
Right.
And Stephen Greer was saying, compared to him, he's a moron. You're opening the room for gags there. Sorry, you're opening room for gags. Be careful. And but what does all of it mean? And there was where he was going into Congress or the Senate or whatever it was, and he said his remote viewers were at war with their remote viewers. Oh, it all gets so complicated. And the government's remote viewers were scared. Yeah, you scaredy cats, because all these ETs, all these ETs walked in with Stephen Greer and his team and his gang, his posse. And the remote viewers could see that, and they could see them all coming in and sitting down with them and having a debate with the government, which struck me as, well, why don't they just sort of suddenly appear and disappear? Quick wave, and why don't you do that? If it's all on the level of remote viewing, and I don't doubt remote viewing, don't get me wrong, and that's a psionic thing. I don't doubt that, but there are other possible explanations. And I'm not saying it's not psychic, but there are loads of explanations for that, and there are explanations for why these things can't happen, I think. I mean, there are too many question marks in all of this. You've answered a question without really answering a question because 5 other questions have replaced it. So yeah, I mean, I all of that's great stuff. I don't know where do you want me to go with all this, gentlemen. Guide me.
Well, I mean, there is. It seems to me that the psionics is basically like a rebrand, in my opinion, of psychic and things like that. I do think that they're all very very similar, and it's just coming out in a big way about all this now. With I don't know if you've heard of the guy named Jake Barber yet, but he came out recently as a former military guy who did crash retrievals, and then he was also on a psionics team, and he actually started a group now called SkyWatcher. And they're like a venture capital funded group who are doing sort of what we're talking now. He did say something like their protocols are similar to CE5 but different, so that leads me to think that they tweaked it in some manner. And they talked about having a dog whistle, which is an audio track of sorts that they I believe it's an audio track. I got a copy of it actually, but I don't know if it's actually what they use. Anyway, the idea behind it is they put this thing out there, and without fail, these craft sort of come in. And one of my questions was with the idea that this audio file is potentially now circulating around the internet, and people all over the world are going to start playing it, assuming that it works, to bring these things in. What do you think that might? Is that a good thing, a bad thing? Like, what could go wrong? Kind of situation with that.
Well, I think young Riso is hoping there's going to be an invasion. Everyone uses the dog whistle. So, and hang on, people are being bloody rude to ETs from the start. Then it's a dog whistle.
Well, I agree. That's not a good.
Let's start by being nice. Let's be rude. Let's tell them about human beings from the beginning. Would they all suddenly rush here? No, because they're already here. They're here. They're everywhere. They're surrounding us. They're glittering footprints everywhere around us. Those energies have always been here. This world is part of their experience as much as ours. Are we summoning them? Yes. But it doesn't mean there's going to be this sort of massive Martian day out, because, I mean, they're meant to be superior, aren't they? So, and also, if someone gave me a dog whistle, my first reaction was how dare you? I'm certainly not turning. So you've got to give. Are these things more intelligent or not? I mean, by definition, the answer must be yes. So why would they suddenly feel the need to rush up and tell the human beings, look, we're here, by the way, guys? That wouldn't be their concern. I mean, rituals. I've been trying to put that bit off. My trouble with all of this, and I think that gentleman is very interesting, and I think his background is interesting. Again, he's reinventing the wheel. Let's all start, although we've never heard of meditation or yoga, and do what we want to do because it might work. Just go to the big boys. And I did listen to some of his footage. Very sane, sensible, sober. What more can be said? I like some of the ideas that sort of energies and consciousnesses are melding in some mysterious way with machines. I thought that was very interesting. But why not express yourself as the machine? Maybe that's the only way certain energies could manifest in our continuum as we understand it. They turn up in a way that we would think of as machines because they don't have a choice. Their limitations in their part of the continuum. That's what they need to do. Therefore, we think that's what it is because we're limited in our perceptions, and that's all they can do to interact with us. Maybe. I don't mind conversations with lots of maybes. There's nothing wrong in chewing the cud. However, I mean, all of this is reinventing the wheel. 500 years ago, during the time of the witches and the witch trials, people were doing the same thing. They weren't calling it psionics. They were calling it something else. There were ritual invitations, incantations, evocations, and the lot of it to interact with non-human intelligences. Most of the universe is non-human intelligence, even if we're only talking about ordinary zoological stuff, insect intelligence, other mammalian intelligence. We're surrounded by intelligence. That's not something we don't take on board enough, but it's not human intelligence. And we do a really bad job of interacting with that, let alone anything from anywhere else. So, the magicians of the past, the Victorian psychics and spiritualists, they were doing that. They were inviting energies, presences to turn up. And sometimes they did. Did they all of the time? No, because no one's on a dog leash, even if they're listening to a dog whistle. You don't have to turn up. I mean, some contemporary people in spiritualism are so vile to the idea of ancestral spirits turning up. They need to be told a few home truths about what they are as human beings, let alone us talking about their techniques. Appalling. We won't go down that route. But certainly 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, there were rituals in place. What those gentlemen are describing are ritual conditions whereby these other things, these other energies, these other entities start to interact. Where it goes wrong nowadays, in my view, or where it's limited in modern terms in a very dangerous way, is that our predecessors always made sure they were protected. There were protection rituals that you had to do before any of this was undertaken, and you always tested the entity. They were known as notorious liars. That strikes me as ufology as well. Not that the experiencers are lying, but the entities aren't telling the whole truth. That's across ufology, whether we like it or not, whether Stephen Greer likes it or not. They mislead from time to time, not all of them, or they just tell big porkies and we can catch them out. So that would be nothing unusual in ritual conditions. The first thing you do is cross question the entity and you make sure you know what you're dealing with and that it's going to play fair and give you the truth as a response. So, I think not only are there analogies between what people in the ufology community are doing now and what people are doing then, I think it's directly analogous, not simple similarities, but we're actually doing it on a much simpler, a much more fragile basis, and we'll get the sorts of results which can either mislead or do worse. I mean, I think Mike's instinctive reaction to that is not only good but appropriate. It's called for. What are we giving access to, and what does it want to do? Who is it? What is it? And what's it up to? Yeah, I mean, there are rumors going around. We've all heard them that people in the corporations, I can easily believe it. They some of them believe in the very big corporations they're interacting with other intelligences, and they just want to do anything they can to secure their position. But that's called black magic. That's called black magic. Are you really sure you know what you're doing, and are you really sure that's what you want? Because those energies, again, they're to do with immediate gratification, but they're not to do with anything else. What do you think, guys?
Well, that was excellent. Great points. I love the point you made about most intelligence out there in the universe is not human, because we can be quite self-focused, thinking that we're the ultimate intelligence, we're the only intelligence, but that's far from the truth.
Well, yeah, anyone that's ever been to a dolphin park knows that we're very far from the only intelligence. I mean, do they look down on us? I mean, their brains are bigger. They've been around longer than us. They get along with most of the life in the ocean. I mean, they're doing much better than us. My favourite analogy of ant colonies, as a society, they do much better than us. Crabs, I like crabs going along a beach because what they do is they stare you out. So some sort of cognition is going along. If they feel threatened, they stare you out. We're surrounded by intelligence. One of the hallmarks of the creative powers is intelligence. I mean, the Rupert Sheldrake mob. Somebody said the other day, I can't remember her name offhand, do forgive me, loads of qualifications, which is always a good thing, because it means, there's someone of substance to dialogue with, loads of experience, was saying, galactic filaments, they look to her like neurons. So maybe the whole universe is thinking, you know, absolutely great, but it was said 2,000 years ago. So I don't understand why we've got to just go constantly say the same things, although it's some new discovery. Why can't we ground ourselves as individuals and as species and settle certain things and then go upwards? Why can't we do that? Because that seems to be what's happening. What worries me is the so-called military interaction with these energies. I'm sure the American DOD, Department of Defense, is no more demonic than the Ministry of Defense, but I think they're both demonic. I'm sorry, keeping a certain class of people in position, no matter what, isn't for the collective good, whether they like that or not. And if you're not careful, you destroy the way of life you're trying to preserve with the methods of preserving it. You've got to be, you've got to be careful about how you go about things. I mean, we've all heard the stories of how they're interacting with energies from elsewhere. And from what I've heard, they too don't use the basic protocols of a Neanderthal magician who would have asked what they were and what their intentions are. So, in other words, they're going into all this blind and being fed information. It always seems to do with increasing violence. So, in the past, the magician, the circle of adepts, would have known they were dealing with negative entities and they would have dismissed them. But that's not what the military's doing. They're trying to weaponize it, but who's playing who there? If you assume that, us human beings are starting out and we can kick ass, well, great, but is that really what we're doing? And are there older and more powerful energies than us that have their own agendas and their own view of what's going on? And that's not what they want. There are too many pleasant Dorothy in Kansas assumptions there for me to be comfortable about that. The military interact on a ritual basis with these energies. They put none of the protections in place. They take all this information apparently at face value and they thirst for further interaction. I can't think of anything much more dangerous and warped and warping than that. Why did they resist, the magicians of the past, if they were on a path of light, resist all of that? Because your view and your judgment was diminished and warped by your interaction with that type of energy. So, we got to be careful. We got to what people nowadays don't want to do. We've got to be careful.
Well, okay, I didn't want to interrupt you earlier, but you sort of gave a perfect example of something I wanted to bring up too. You were talking about with the machines manifesting and such, and then us somehow interacting with the machines. During one of these SkyWatcher presentations that they put out, one of the crew members was in a chair outside with like a sleep mask on, presumably in like a meditative state, and apparently was bringing in what sounded like a physical craft. And at one point, apparently, another craft came in as though to try to prevent that from happening. And the guy said something to the effect of, "Something's not right. I'm in trouble. Get me out of here." And I thought that was pretty interesting and sort of strange. Like, why does he call out to the other team members to get him out if it's his consciousness connected to it? Why can't he just disconnect it from himself? And then, allegedly, when he did disconnect his consciousness, I believe they said that the thing just fell out of the sky. So, what could that possibly be?
Right. Let me again, a typical David circuitous answer. So forgive me for this. In esoteric circles, there is nothing unusual in what you just described. In esoteric circles, I'm thinking of things like Alice Bailey. The Bible Belt will go back to hating me now I've mentioned her. She's interesting. The people in that sort of so-called trans-Himalayan school are interesting because they believe the Earth itself was given a kick up the arse by ETs. This was a world not keeping up with the schedule of cosmic evolution way back in the day. And the hierarchy, as those people refer to it, which was based on Venus. Now, they don't mean this level Venus, Do they mean the planet Venus? Maybe, but if they do mean it, they mean on some sort of astral or etheric level, not on physical rock gas Venus. They don't mean that. So the hierarchy left part of their system, left their world to come to our world to give the Earth a bit of a kickstart. It needed a bit of a kickstart to get back on track. Also weird stories like, our native and natural position is meant to be cosmic. Therefore, in esoteric circles, there would be nothing unusual at all on the paths of light, discussing the cosmic connection, discussing our interrelationship with the planets, the stars. Again, thousands of years old. That is not new. The fact that lots of people nowadays don't know that is sad. I blame the church, by the way. Yeah, I blame any institution that wants to control information for not really serving the human race. But that doesn't mean we throw out the baby with the bathwater, because the church has done a huge amount of good as well as bad, like everything else, yada, 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 yada. It does mean, however, that sort of discourse needs to be remembered. The hierarchy were said to use vehicles, not the macabre stuff really irritates me as it's used in the ufology community. If you mean a spaceship, say a spaceship. So no, it's not special. It's a spaceship. You know, NASA can build one. So if you're using a word like that, by definition, I suppose it must be more than that. It must be more than just a machine, as we understand mechanics. So that's when you're beginning to look at macabre territory. You know, chariots of fire doesn't just mean the exhaust of a UFO. You know, if you think that, then you just need to read more and use your imagination a bit more. Don't limit yourself. Don't hold on to this old stuff. You know, in any pejorative sense, expand your mind. Expand your mind. What can it mean? If you're looking at astral and etheric machines, I noticed the only guy to explore that in the arts recently was actually David Lynch. A man who proved me utterly wrong. You can have popular surrealism. I spent years arguing with everyone in this country that it couldn't be done. Okay, he's proved it. Surrealism on TV. My God, I hate you, David Lynch. Rest in peace. You know, I mean, the last series of Twin Peaks is not only conceptually brilliant. I mean, the man was touched by genius, is touched by genius. There were machines in it, which I think can't have mistaken anybody's. You know, you can't forget that wasn't there. You're mistaken if you think Agent Cooper isn't dealing with machines. He's in another world. He can't get back to this one. And, you know, 1 minute, one of the machines that he needs to somehow interact with is saying one thing. And the next minute is saying something completely different. And he's not fitting that together. It's a machine, but it's not a machine. Therefore, it's working in its way, but it's not a way that's known to us. It's only when he begins to cotton on that he has to interact with these things in a completely different way that he begins to escape wherever it is that he is. And, you know, that struck me as so interesting. I mean, one of the undiscussed premises of Twin Peaks, of course, is that, you know, SETI and all the rest of it were looking for extraterrestrial life and suddenly realized it was all down here, which is why they turned the scanners down here, the FBI, the CIA, and they're looking at places like Twin Peaks. That's one of the unwritten subplots in the whole of that series. They're looking at the Earth. What's going on here? Because it's all happening here. I think there's nothing unusual in an adept, because that is a man describing the experience of an adept in the way of an adept to other adepts, only not as adept as he should be. You're interacting with a machine, with a reality that is not human. Therefore, you know, it's more powerful. It's doing what it wants to do. We are telling ourselves we're interacting with it. We get into trouble when things go wrong. Oh my God, things can go wrong. Something else turned up. Which one is the good thing? You know, good in the sense that beneficial to you as a person and to us as a species. Which one is the good one? Was the other one trying to protect him? You know, if there are no protocols in place to question what their motives are, maybe he was caught by a negative energy and it didn't want to let him go. And of course, there'd be nothing unusual in those stories. They're around from the witch trials. They're around amongst the Inca. Those stories are as old as forever. Yeah, it strikes me that we're listening to people who've got this sort of gung-ho, kick-ass, modernist view that it's all modern. Let's get UFOs on the ground. But if you have that wonderful kids attitude, which I'm sorry, that's what it is, be expect to run into dangers very quickly, because maybe that's what you think, but not the universe around you. That's not what the world around you thinks. We all got to be
Interesting.
more careful. We've all got to be more careful. It didn't surprise me at all what you've just said, Mike. Um, my worry there is, since all this is going on, what are we actually letting into the world? There was a sort of rule of thumb amongst occultists, esotericists, centuries back, that you were responsible for what you gave entry into the world. They couldn't enter the world unless we gave them entry. There was some sort of barrier, there was some sort of block, and no matter what they did, they couldn't pass it. And that's why they need a human being, human magic, human esotericism as a bridge. They need us, and they need those techniques as a bridge to gain entry. Now, if you remember that from the past, we're on a very different footing indeed. By the way, these hierarchies, theoretical or otherwise, they didn't want that to happen. They don't want people interacting with these energies, apparently, before time. Therefore, they're not saying never, but they are saying in those books, in those teachings, not now, you're not ready for it.
Okay, so I got a couple things to toss out there. One of them is that the ET craft itself, many people have said it doesn't have like a steering wheel or a yoke or anything like that. It actually interacts with the consciousness of the pilot, and that's how you maneuver it with essentially your thoughts. So I wanted to get your opinions on that aspect of it, but I also wanted to toss out there that, I mean, in a way, it says you kind of said like they can't come here unless we invite them in, which to me sounds, I don't want to use the D word, but a little dark, right? If that wasn't the word, but with people who have experiences or get taken or whatnot, I don't think any of them, well, with rare exception, are inviting that in. So there's like two different lanes we can kind of go down there.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I think it's dangerous. I take that word back. I think it's unwise to conflate the two avenues of
Okay.
experience.
Yeah. All right.
Anomalous phenomena happen, and that's nothing to do with us. That's to do with these energies and what they're doing, and they're going about their own business, and we get in the way, but it's not to do with us. We get caught up in it, but it's not to do with us. Therefore, ironically, you're meant to be safe. You've not invited it into your life. You've not invited it into your circumstances, your communities. What used to worry the ancients about the practice of occultism was that there was no guarantee of when it would all stop. The magician has started something, but there was no guarantee of when it would all stop. And you just want to get on with your ordinary life. You don't want things coming out the closet. You don't want to be forced to interact with energies and entities that have nothing to do with your life. You want to get on with your human life. There was no guarantee of it ending. Therefore, rural communities were terrified of that aspect of it all, which it gave way to, I think, in the course of time, general fright, fear to do with it all, which I think is justified. Fear and caution are not entirely divorced. Therefore, people nowadays are cautious about nothing, and look where it's leading us. We need more caution. But that's one way of interacting with the continuum. We are part of the continuum. We're not the whole world. I know that might come as a big shock to some people, but you're not the whole world. You're not the center of it. You are part of it. Other things are doing what they're doing, and you get caught up in their plans and their views and what they want, which is very, very different from an invitation, which is the conscious interaction with that world, and you take it on the chin about what happens, since you are the instigator. On that side, anomalous phenomena, there's no question of you being an instigator. It's just what goes on. Shit happens. But on the other interaction, you are very responsible indeed for what goes on, because you have taken the first move. You have invited the energy, the entity. You've not bothered to check anything. You've not bothered to even check maybe your own reasons. Why are you doing this? What do you want from it? Do you want knowledge? Do you want power? What is the reason you're doing that? Are you doing it like some sort of adolescent, just getting drunk at a party because you don't have any self-control? That strikes me as incautious anyway. If you drink to excess as an adolescent too many times, you're dead. Your liver gives out, you OD on something. It doesn't continue forever as this wild party. You either grow up, oh my God, I wish people would grow up. You either grow up or you end up physically and medically impaired. You can't keep doing that. My first reaction, as I say, is we need to separate those two levels of intercourse and exchange with these energies. And the second of those is very far from innocent. If you have invited, there's some guy passing my house. He's got an axe and it's covered in blood. Hey, interesting person, come into my house. I'm opening the door. What do you expect to happen? If people really want to be that naive, and I know some of them do, then okay, but please don't start trying over spilt milk, because you were the guy that opened the door, you saw the axe, you saw the blood, and you still did it. Is it a bit of a rave? Is it a bit of excitement? My God, you need to get out more. If you think, I can think of much better ways to get excited than all that. Um, it wasn't the credentials of the gentleman that worried me. I looked at the footage, as I said. I think it was Stuart that very kindly sent it to me. It was, why are they doing all of this? What do they think will benefit them? Do they want to go on a lecture tour? Is somebody writing a book? Good. Is somebody going to make some money out of it? Excellent. Nothing wrong with any of that, but incautious. So you're inviting things outside of your control so you can come up with a book deal. I'm going to take this vial of strychnine and tell you how it felt in 3 volumes. I'm dead. You know, I mean, the naivete of the UFO community, the ufologists, and that's said with love, can be a little arresting at times. And we've got to get a grip. If these things are real, they are real. What are they doing and why are they doing it? And why are sometimes we in the way? What is it that makes these energies want to get us out the way? That doesn't sound healthy to me. We just got to be careful of that. Mike, my friend.
Yeah, if I could just jump in, I'm just speculating, but my thought is that the reason that they're doing this now and very publicly is because they apparently did it in private with the military already, and they're potentially, in my humble opinion, wanting to sort of push the disclosure aspect forward in a way that is undeniable to people because the government isn't doing it. And I don't necessarily think that they're out to make money for it or do tours or anything. I think they just want to show the world, like, look, this is real, we can do it. And that's sort of their motivation. I just wanted to put that out there.
But my God, I'm more of an American than you. There's nothing wrong in making a quick buck. As I say, whatever floats their boat. Nothing surprises me about the military nowadays. They've lost their sense of honour and they've lost their sense of decency. Nothing surprises me with the military now. Who are they serving? Are you serving the community? No, you're not. Face a few hard facts. No, you're not. How much disclosure do people need? And will it convince everybody? Disclosure, it strikes me as there's disclosure after disclosure after disclosure. Are people listening? No, because if you're working 5 jobs, you're not meeting the rent. I think I've said this before. And you want a relationship, but whoever you're courting is playing hard to get. Those are what you're thinking. You're thinking about those things, not ETs. You're not thinking about that. The Stephen Greer, what was that original thing he did what was it in the Senate? I can't remember. In all these highly credentialed people.
That,
saying,
I think I was,
I will go on record. That's impressive. And that, what more disclosure do you need than that? There are people nowadays going around saying the Earth is flat. So despite 3,000 years of mathematics, satellites, the equator, the curvature of the Earth, NASA, there are still people going around saying that. We have disclosed that is probably not true, and they don't believe it. I think there's a weird obsession amongst ufologists. You are going to listen to me, and you are going to believe there are UFOs. That isn't life. That isn't life. And it strikes me there have been loads of disclosures. At what point will ufologists be happy that enough evidence has been given? The point is never. If you don't want to hear about those things and you feel they're not part of your life, there is very little anyone can do to force that issue. And this is the minister bit of me coming up. And I would be really against anyone forcing that issue. People have to stop forcing people. There's a cliff in front of you. Everyone's explained if you walk any further, you will plummet to your death. Is it? You've explained everything you need to explain. You're doing everything you can possibly do to prevent that. At the end of the day, the guy's going to do it or the guy's not going to do it. There's only so much anyone can do in any scenario without it becoming, you lock the guy up and you take away his free will, his choice. But is that a solution? As I say, it's almost on the verge of some sort of fetish in the ufology people. Listen. I think it's, and most people do believe it. Aren't there all these surveys, particularly in America, by all these sociologists, of people that do believe UFOs are part of our human experience? I mean, the statistics are huge. Most people do. Most people think something is going on. I mean, what more can you say than that? What more can you say than that without real knowledge? And none of us have enough knowledge to be able to explain what is actually going on. We know a bit, we know in parts, we know through a dark glass. We can't say more than that. We're human. I don't know what else. So a flying saucer land, well, that's the old chestnut, isn't it? Lands in front of the White House on the lawn, and then 5 hours later, somebody says, but did it? Because that's what the media's like. It's a fake, it's a con, then an argument starts, and you've got experts on this side and experts on that side, and everybody's making money. That's life. And is it important? No, that's not the important thing. The important thing is keeping an open mind, a loving heart, realizing we live in a mysterious, highly mysterious and beautiful world where these things happen. And do we know what they are? Actually, at the end of the day, we don't. But they happen and they're real. What worries me, because that sounds very modern American to me, and very sort of relaxed and transcendentalist, what worries me is when people want to force the issue, because then you end up like those guys forcing ET to do what you want. And so it's like opening the door to the guy with the axe. I am going to prove my point no matter what. The door's open, come in, mad murderer, because I'm going to prove to everyone in this house that you are there. That strikes me as incautious and very unwise indeed. I, to be honest, wasn't surprised something else turned up and tried to give the heave-ho, get out to this initial craft. I mean, there's too much trust in all of this. They are just machines. My mind is in that machine. Who made the machine? What's it for? What's it doing? Why are you inviting it into your space? Why are you having such difficulty getting in and out of it? These are questions that need to be asked before anything goes any further. I hear massive naivete. I don't hear research.
Interesting.
There's a lot of layers to this. I like the fact that it came up about how this is ancient knowledge, and it's very interesting that the aspect of protection came up, because that came up in a previous podcast we did where we discussed that back and forward, whether it's important to have a protection ritual first. And also, I'm struck by the question that Reverend Dave was asking about why. What's the motive? Why do you want to contact these beings? That's a very important question.
I would agree, and I also want to throw it out there too, because I only went to one CE5 in my life, but there was the option of a protection sort of ritual beforehand, and then I think the actual meditation does have a little bit of a protection aspect to it, as well as the Monroe Institute gateway process also has a protective element to it. So I think it's important to put that out there when we're talking about it, that that it is sort of built into these protocols.
I think we've got to start talking about mental, ethical, and spiritual hygiene. I don't take. I'm feeling poorly, so I go to the chemist and I just take everything off the top shelf and I swallow everything. That's not to your advantage. Why would it be different in ufology? I'm doing everything I can to prove my point. Oh my God, I'm out of my depth. Why wouldn't that be directly analogous? There's such a thing as maturity in our outlooks, and there's such a thing as motive. As I say, I'm not against anybody making a buck. I'm not against book deals. I'm looking for a new agent. I'm myself. Why would any of that be wrong? There's this sort of neo-Puritanism in some of this. Why? People have a right to earn a living. If you've got something interesting to say, come and say it. I sometimes put on events. I make sure we try and cover at least the expenses of people. Because it's unfair on them otherwise. That's how the world works. You're showing a bit of respect. So mental, spiritual, ethical hygiene. The first question, because of my interest in esotericism, is always, why are people doing that? I have taken part myself in certain undertakings, in certain rituals. You said something that absolutely fascinated me a minute ago, that the protection rituals at Joshua Tree are optional. My God, what madness. You're walking into a room of toxic gas, but you needn't wear the gas mask. It's okay, it's up to you. What absolute madness. There is radiation in the room next door. No, you don't have to wear the hazmat suit. You wear it if you want to. I think that's madness. What is wrong with these people? So I will walk into a completely unknown situation, trusting in myself. But is that what you do in other fields of life? Is that And is that wise if you do? The answer is possibly no. Certainly in any ritual, which I say I've been involved in sometimes, in my earlier, more firmed buttock days when I was a lad. Do these things work? Yes, the results are phenomenally powerful. Yes, they're almost overwhelming if you get a group of people that know what they're doing. Right? The first thing they do is protection. And then it sounds boring, is that the right word? These endless inner esoteric protocols where you're testing everything. You're testing the equipment that you've got. You're testing each other to make sure everything is on balance. You're testing the space that you're working in. Is there something hidden in the space you're working in? Is it going to help or not? Everything is tested and quizzed and interrogated before the process of invitation actually even begins. If Stephen Greer doesn't know that, shame on him. I suspect he does. That's the problem. You can take democracy to the level of Russian roulette if you really want to. Here's a loaded gun. We don't know where the bullet is. Fire it off. That's a bit of a laugh, isn't it? You might end up dead, so it's not really a bit of a laugh. I shame on him, and I mean that this time. If that's the level of laissez-faire that goes on at these meetings, because I can't see anything good at that, even on a basic psychological level. As I say, part of my background is with psychotherapy, is with counselling. I wouldn't dream of being that cavalier with anyone I was working with, and shame on people that do that. because you're dealing with complex issues. Sorry, Mike. Yeah.
Well, no, I just want to interject again because I mean, I appreciate having a neutral position and looking at both sides of it, but I also don't want to promote something that is potentially misconstrued. From my understanding, the meditation itself does have like a protection element and a love element to it. When I said the optional protection, the folks there, they had some sage and they were offering to sage around you before the meditation began. So as an extra layer, that's what I was talking about. So I just didn't want us to be saying something incorrect about the process, as it were.
Oh, Mike, no, and I stand corrected. I'm just very, very cautious in these fields. Nothing wrong with a bit of sage. And let's give another example. Haven't we all had that type of experience where you pick up a song, then it's on the radio 5 minutes later, or somebody starts singing it? I mean, that's an anomalous phenomenon.
Mm.
Haven't we all had the experience when, oh, I haven't met that person for years, then you turn the street and you meet them? That's an anomalous phenomenon. We've all had experiences of walking into a new property or somebody, our grandparents, and there's an uneasy energy in one of the rooms, an uneasy presence. That's an anomalous phenomenon. It's not to do with us, but it's there. It happens. Is it just our psychology? Now, I've said this loads of times on the show. I don't know what that question means. Just psychology. The point is, it's there. No matter what the ontology of all of this is, it's there. It's part of our experience. It can cause havoc. We got to be careful. That's generally part of human experience. Haunted houses, strange atmospheres, energies that build up that are not to our advantage. That I mean, some people in Mediterranean countries go around clapping in rooms that haven't been used during the winter just to get a flow of energy, a bit of life, some new vitality into that space. I mean, these are things that are known to all of us. Why are they suddenly forgotten by the ufology community the minute this starts? Right. This is a bit of a hazmat suit. You needn't wear all of it. Don't wear the hood. Wear the rest of it. Everything will be fine. Either the room's full of radiation or it's not. It's not a question of dialogue, debate. My civil rights, sir. No. It's not to do with those things. It's to do with psychological realities, and as some people, including myself, would say, more than just that. If you're walking into a field of landmines, it's not to do with your civil rights. If I'm shouting at the side, please don't go any further. I'm not interfering with your free will, and it's up to you what happens next if you are determined not to listen. But don't say you took all the necessary precautions. Oh, I tripped the landmine at the last minute. I was as careful as I could have been tippy-toeing over that field, because it doesn't work. Stephen Greer hates me now. There we are.
Well, okay, so that's kind of interesting too, because in one of our psionic conversations, when the protection element came up, because I specifically asked about it, so the response that came out made sense too. They said basically, like, do you think a negative entity or a demon is really going to honor or listen to your protection meditation? So when you were talking about tiptoeing through the landmine, and then poof, the landmine didn't care that you were wearing the hazmat suit. So can you speak on that? Like, how if someone does protect themselves, like psychically or whatever, would that prevent a negative thing from messing around with you?
The brief answer is yes. I mean, if you're tippy-toeing over the field in a hazmat suit and it's dangerous, then you also throw a rope around a near tree and pull yourself up and swing over the mines, because you want to cross the field, but you mustn't do it that way. That comes down to anthropology in a philosophical sense. Our societies, all of our human societies know, and it's our collective experience as the human race. We know we interact with these energies for good and ill. We know that. That's just a given. The sociologists, the anthropologists have done study after study after study. Again, how much more evidence do people need? I mean, some of them are classic works in scholarship. They are impeccable, and the guy that's actually done the study also is impeccable. How much more evidence do you need? On a philosophical level, there is nothing unusual about talking about non-human types of intelligence, talking about different types of consciousness. I mean, that's, in neuroscience nowadays, I mean, they've taken up the philosophical gauntlet, and my God, talking with that lot, it's non-stop now. That's metaphysics 101. They've suddenly discovered it's not just them, and they've taken to it like a duck to water. Oh my God, this guy was saying this and he was saying that. Fascinating. That's when progress is happening. Anthropology. What is a man? What is a man? What is truth? Certainly the great religions, which must have something to do with all of this, for the simple reason most of the human race for most of human time has had some sort of religious system in its culture. Has that always worked to the benefit of all? Clearly not. Has that always been a positive, glowing influence? Sadly, not always. Be sensible. No, anything human can fall apart and corrupt itself. And does that mean we all stop doing those things? No, we just get on as far as we can as human beings and go forward. To err is to human, is to be human. Certainly the great religions, as I've alluded to before, and in esoteric circles, they would say, well, this bit is not the whole of a human being. By way of origin, you belong to the creative impulse. Whatever triggered the first principle, whatever triggered creation at the beginning of time. Now you can go down that route from astrophysics, the real high priesthood. You talk about a Big Bang and the endless arguments. I love the Big Bang thing. Was it going forwards in time or backwards? Now we're talking turkey. These are arguments. Or was it doing both at the same time? Yeah, let's get in there. This is interesting. So the Big Bang, which is the ultimate mystery ever, no one, by the way, denies there's a first cause, a first principle, which is interesting. In other words, the trigger that made the bit that we are, the continuum, the cosmos, the universe, the galaxies. So whatever that is, in religious terms, we are part of that. Human beings have a privileged position. Somehow or for some weird reason, we are part of that original principle. We are part of that original primary energy. We have a direct relationship with the ultimate. Therefore, on a physical level, there's an impregnated egg, there's a fetus, there's a schoolboy, a schoolgirl, there's an adult that gets on with their life well or not, depending on circumstances, finances, yada, yada. There's an older person. Some people believe in reincarnation after death. Some people believe in other worlds. But it's all really a very similar story, no matter what interpretation you give of that story. It's really, really quite similar. But let's go for esoteric circles. We're also more than one body, as I believe I've alluded to before. There's an astral body, there's an etheric body, there are other bodies, there are about 7 in all. We are responsible in esoteric circles for animating the rest of them. There's an argument going around in British esoteric circles at the moment, which is interesting. And I believe it's the Rudolf Steiner mob, the anthroposophist that started it. There will be no further interaction with higher energies. This might give us some hope, and I'll explain why in a minute. No further interaction with higher energies that we don't instigate. They feel they've taken us to the point now where it has to be us as human beings to stop relying on mechanical evolution. We've got to stop relying on everything else giving us a bit of a ride. Now it's up to us to take the bull by the horns and say, right, this is us, this is what we are, and we've got to get forward under our own steam. Now that would fit in with inviting these energies and intelligences into our lives, because that actually would be taking the next step and saying we want to evolve, we want to expand as human beings and interact, invite you into our experience, maybe for good or ill, but invite you in and work forward from there. Certainly in esoteric terms, a human being is never simply or only a human being. And there are aspects to you which are divine. But as I say, the interesting thing about those circles is all of that needs consciously invigorating. It doesn't just happen. Even there, though, it can happen sometimes by accident. I mean, Sri Aurobindo in India, I mean, he was meant to be an ordinary guy. Pondicherry, the ashram was Pondicherry, I think. He was meant to be an ordinary guy going about, buying vegetables. Then all of a sudden, for some weird reason, everything clicked into place, and he was an incredibly enlightened guru. So that his past lives had somehow fitted in with his present life, and it was something to do with buying the vegetables. And all of a sudden, he was not what he was. He was the next stage of evolution. So, there are stories of that happening, but, we can't rely on that. And that's not what the higher energies want. They want us to step up to the mark. We've done all these things for you. Isn't it time you started joining in with the cosmic family in a more adult fashion? So, it's not all doom and gloom and fear. There's a lot of positivity, particularly in the UFO community. There's a lot of, a lot of things that can be said which are very much to everyone's advantage.
I feel like we're collectively inviting AI into our experience at the moment. It seems to be an egregore or a tulpa. There's some sort of esoteric layer to that, I feel.
Oh, my other and better half, of course, is the person you talked to about AI and surveillance. We are slaves now. We are slaves now. So let's look at this on an esoteric level. Excuse me. Some people think we're building bodies for other energies to animate. So demonic energies will finally get entry into our world without our invitation, although indirectly it is our invitation, of course, because we build them. So they can take a new body and work their wicked way upon the world finally, without all these wicked human beings putting a stop to it. That's frightening. I'm not against AI. What I'm against is the fantasy that community can't. Isn't it tempting to say there's a new order of intelligence in the world and we've created it, and it's as good as us. I mean, maybe one day, but not now. Not now. And if that happens one day, I mean, the point is we don't know what will happen. Will it kill us all? Will it want us all as pets? Will it just, my favourite version? Will it just think we're all absolutely awful and go and do its own business and ignore us? Which is my favourite one. Yeah. I mean, AI is a part of our life. It's not going to go away. It's part of the global economy. The global economy isn't going to go away, no matter what President Trump does, because the banks like it, the financiers like it. You're not going to go against international trade as it's practiced in the 21st century. That won't happen. It can't happen. He likes it too, by the way. He's a businessman. So that's not entirely honest. Right? I saw a bit of footage with President Trump in his office with a couple of billionaires a week or so back, and he was proudly crowing about the fact some old guy had made, what was it, 15 billion that morning. Great. Is he a decent human being? So, AI is tied in directly with the technologies of surveillance, and of course, I can't remember what it's called, surveillance capitalism, where they're actually trying not only to patent processes in our body, blood flows, the way a chemical works in our body, they're trying to patent it. That's why the corporations are far from innocent. They're also trying to measure the effects of how you get inside someone's psychology for advertising purposes. They're trying to minimize the range of pleasures people have, so the corporations can supply the limited range of pleasures forever on that footing. These are far from innocent people. All of that is going on, and AI is being used in a highly negative way at the minute. And has that discourse taken place in public? Yet no, because nobody's really sure what's happening unless you are au fait with that type of material, and you know what the differences are between that type of surveillance and the police surveillance of 50 years ago. And there's no parallel. There's nothing in common with that. And, who are the police serving at the minute? The corporations and the banks. They're certainly not serving the will of the community. Why are they doing that? Because that's the way the world has changed.
So, Reverend David, that's pretty interesting because it was, I don't know, within the last month or two, I saw a little clip on, I think it was X or something, of a bunch of AI robots in China. They were doing a demonstration parade, and one of those robots just went rogue and went over to the audience and started almost like beating the crap out of somebody. And then the security guards went and grabbed it really quickly, and then like, oh, it was just a I don't know what their excuse was, but I mean, that wasn't good. I hope it's not a precursor or a preview of what's to come.
I mean, those Chinese boys, they never miss a trick, do they? I mean, they're so far ahead of us all in robotics. I mean, that's one of the reasons between the sort of the sort of American-China clash at the minute. Commerce, the Chinese are incredibly good and advanced compared to the American technologies in those fields at the minute. It's commerce, it's money, it's business. It's nothing. Are they all weird commo visionaries? No, I mean, it's business. They've invested in those fields more than Americans or British people have done for a while. Unwisely, as it turned out. I don't know that footage. I've seen robots on fashion parades. I've seen the robotic dogs going along the streets with the police, the Chinese police. Um, I remember RoboCop and what was it, Ed 20, who flew into a tantrum at the beginning and decided to mow down the executives in the boardroom. There'll be ups and downs with AI. That's what happens with new technologies. Does that mean it's conscious? Probably not. I mean, what was it, Stratford Wives, that old movie, where Silicon Valley has replaced everybody's wife with an incredibly good-looking young robot. Is that going? Is that going to happen? I don't know. And we're here not really to talk about commerce. I mean, all of those things are driven by commerce. We're here to talk about, what would be the esoteric, the ufology, the psionic implication of that. I think it's far too early to say. I mean, the fact some people have actually tried to meld their mind, their consciousness, it struck me more like a mind than a consciousness, with a machine is, one of those red flags, the shape of things to come, for good or ill. So we're here to talk about that sort of thing. But it's too early days, Mike. It's too early to actually see how all of this will unfold. Which is why, again, we need to be cautious and start asking adult questions because we're very quickly moving into an adult world, again, whether we like it or not. So the esoteric thing I was saying a minute ago, where some people believe the elder powers, the powers of bright intelligence, want to give us another kick up the arse. The fact that that's a story going around at the minute, in one way, is not really surprising because it is time. We can go no further on a one-dimensional level. On the 3D level, we find mixing metaphors. We find ourselves in. It's really time to start exploring other aspects of reality because mathematically it's already being done, philosophically it's already being done. Some of the technologies these boys come up with are miracles. It's already happening, and it's time for the rest of us, those that want to try and say, okay, how does this impact me as an individual, my community, and what are we going to do about it? Because and that's never a bad thing, really.
Absolutely.
So, in both esoteric circles and ufology, references made to interdimensional beings. So, I can see that parallel there. And this whole thing about negative interdimensional beings and positive interdimensional beings, some people, from my experience on the left-hand path, are basically like, let's just confront it all. And I imagine that's why they're not doing the protection rituals, because they think, let's just get this over and done with now. I can deal with my dark side. But I would say there is a place for the protection ritual. And as we discussed earlier, I don't know whether that's happening in these military circles. But what I want to get at here is there are people observing all this and delving into these fields without a whole lot of knowledge. So they're just emulating other people's activities, turning up to these C5 events, they can attract beings that they might have difficulty getting rid of later. And that's another thing I wanted to ask you. If someone came to you and said, I've been to these C5 events, now I've got this disruptions in my home, some sort of poltergeist activity, what would you tell them? What would you advise them at that point?
Stuart, I'm a Catholic priest. What do you think I'd do? Um, I've seen The Exorcist. Um, I mean, oh gosh, I mean, there are traditional ways and traditional formula for dealing with traditional problems. These are traditional problems. I love, oh God, what was that movie about Father Amorth, the Pope's Exorcist? I loved all that. I read his book afterwards. A man of simple faith, not right about everything, but it was a corker of a story. And of course, based on the truth, based on his life. Um, in Catholicism, unlike even liberal Catholicism, unlike Protestantism, you don't always naturally assume darkness is everywhere and out to get you. There has to be this huge investigation, and everybody, what they do normally nowadays is the first thing they say is, have you sought psychiatric assistance? Because, 9 times out of 10, you're not dealing with those things, right? So it needs a medical procedure or it needs a counselling procedure. If it's felt after investigations and discussions and what have you, there is an extra level of difficulty. That's when it starts being discussed by the local church, and they will contact the Society of Exorcists. In Catholicism and the various Catholic churches, we have societies of exorcists. In other words, the professional body with people who feel they've been given the gift or have developed the gift of exercising and expelling, of calming those negative scenarios, getting rid of the negative energies and calming any disturbance. Am I willing to say that doesn't happen in every other religion? No, of course I'm not. I do think Catholics are particularly good at it. Um, and there are reasons for that, but that goes on a completely tangential angle, so I won't pursue that. I mean, I think there are historical and theological reasons for that. Based on the fact that Catholicism is actually an amalgam of many different paths, but that gets complex very quickly. Negative transdimensional entities. I mean, that's an interesting thing. I mean, as we were saying a minute ago, and even Stephen Greer admits there are negative influences at work in the world, which is why I'm so sniffy about the protection exercises. It's not a nice optional extra the minute you admit that we're on different territory, and it really should be insisted upon, whether they're from other planets or other dimensions. My interest in that is, well, aren't we all instantly back on home turf the minute that's introduced as an idea? Yeah, I mean, the great religions have been talking about that forever. Again, this is what they talk about. Um, what makes it more complex is that some of the dimensions, if you listen to the great religions, are actually inside us. They're not outside as mathematical abstractions. What was it? There's this incredible guy who was going around, Rob Bryanton, about 10 years ago, talking about 10 dimensions. He made all these videos and he tries to explain not only mathematically, he's actually a Christian, mathematically, but also in terms of, visualizing the geometry as simply as he can make it, how that affects us, and what it means. It all starts with the point is his catchline. You see a point on screen, then all these vectors going in different directions, and how the vectors lead to another point, which by definition must be another dimension. So some of them, if you listen to NASA has got, it's not true, it's nothing to say, it's got a lot to say. Certainly some of them are mathematical, some of them are very small. We all tend to have this sort of Star Trek attitude. The Starship Enterprise turns up and there's this vastness that Captain Kirk starts shooting missiles at. We all tend to think that. But it's much more complex than that. Some of them, as I say, are nearly abstractions. Some of the dimensions are incredibly small. We as an individual human being wouldn't be able to fit into it, but it's a whole dimension. And some of them are within. I don't think the hard sciences are talking about that at the moment, I've noticed one or two people tinkering with that idea. Sheldrake's one of those people, although not a hard scientist technically, of course. Something that's been known to the esoteric, the religious communities as for zonks, donkey's years. That's why and where the trouble starts. If these negative energies, these entities are using you as a portal, as a point of entry, you are looking at trouble. You're looking at very great personal difficulties. I don't know any people on the left-hand path anymore. I used to. I was never impressed with the sort of gung-ho, kick-ass, G.I. Joe, I can do anything, anywhere, anytime, really. It just strikes me as incautious and not really an accurate assessment of human strengths and weaknesses. There's always the assumption behind that you will win through no matter what. Are we really sure of that? I don't know. I mean, there are lots of reasons. I can see the attraction. I want a castle and I want it now, and I want everyone on their knees the minute I enter a room. Kid stuff, but you can understand, where it comes from. And okay, if that floats your boat. I mean, I prefer colleagues as opposed to disciples. I prefer pink gins on the lawn as opposed to sex, drugs, and rock and roll all the time. Maybe some of the time, but not all of the time. Otherwise, it's a bit wearing on the nerves. So, but I'm the right hand path, so I'm bound to say that. I just think their description of the phenomena, the phenomena of the left hand path, the phenomena of these entities, isn't entirely accurate and certainly not as complete as they think it is. Because the ancient traditions themselves warn the adepts on the dark path. Be careful. Use the symbols of light to keep these things at their bay. And that constantly isn't what's happening. There's something very juvenile about modern times. It's getting worse. It's not getting better. We're sinking back into this I want to be a teenager forever thing. I mean, was being a teenager really that good? I remember when I was a teenager, it was a total pain in the arse. I couldn't wait for it to be over, and I don't think somehow I'm alone in that. There's a mythology that because we didn't have responsibilities, that somehow that's better. No, it's just different. It's just different. I mean, the Vama Marg, the left-hand path, makes lots of claims. I'm more than skeptical of those claims. I'm even more than skeptical that both paths meet at eternity, they meet at infinity. I mean, really, who has said that? And are there any examples of that? There's a lot of gung-ho, as I say, G.I. Joe, machismo, and okay, but there's not much more to it than that. If you have one of my favorite stories of the Buddha is that he is walking along the path one day and a yogi comes up to him who has practiced the dark art and says, by the power of my thoughts, I can now walk over this river. 20 years has given me the power to do what I wish. To which the Buddha replies, what a waste. I can cross the river whenever I want to for a small coin. It depends. It depends what your motives are. Again, it depends, what you're aiming at. And those are not trivial and irrelevant questions. In terms of the Dodd, we will save America at all costs. Strikes me as the wrong way of saving America. I mean, what will you end up with? Is it what you thought you were preserving? It's time for us all to grow up. It's time for us all to have a little more responsibility. We don't have to become, bores in the local bank. We don't all have to turn into accountants. We don't have to challenge Mike in real estate. We don't all have to do that. It's just about taking stock of your own position in life and saying, okay, I'm going to do the best I can with the cards I've been given and try and do that for the people around me. And this is part of life. Ufology, weirdly, is part of life. Anomalous phenomena are part of life. How am I dealing with that? Am I becoming a better and more capable person through that? And it strikes me that that attitude doesn't ask those questions. which is why I'd always be suspicious of it, Stuart.
Wow, excellent. What a great place to end too. Thank you so much for your time today. If people want to find out more about you or get in contact with you, our listeners and viewers, how would they do that?
Clairvoyance and psionics. I'm on Facebook. Yes, it's me. I'm not rich enough to have a secretary. I wish I was. I'm a penniless cleric. So if you find me on Facebook and you're not rude, then yes, I'll interact with you. I'm on LinkedIn for some reason completely beyond me because they keep saying it's the new things to happen. It never is. I'm on X or Twitter or whatever it's called this week. I'm on all social media. Write to my publisher, the wonderful Gwendolyn, who lives in Australia, Gwendolyn Taunton. There are loads of ways to get in touch, and all through you guys. It's very rare that I say, bog off, because I like talking to people. I'm easy to find if you want to find me.
Excellent.
I love that.
Well, thank you as well. That was another amazing conversation, and as they always do, it went to places I wasn't expecting, and you gave me a lot to think about, actually.
I aim to serve. I aim to please, Mike.
Much love to you, my friend, as always.
Yes, thank you very much.
Much love to both of you. Much love to both of you. Take care now.
All right, you too. So, Reverend Stu, when we first started doing all of this, which has actually been a little over a year now, so I forgot to wish you a happy anniversary a couple weeks ago.
Oh, thank you.
But when we first started doing this, I wanted to get into every aspect of it, and where we just were, we're in new territory for sure, and I had no idea that we would ever be in this territory.
Yeah, there's also can be like full circle moments too. So with me on the Christian path and the Gnosticism, I went full circle coming back to Jesus again. You can tell Reverend David William Parry is on board with that too, which is a beautiful thing. So it ultimately just makes us more confident in our faith. And this whole exploration with the ET, UAP, military revelations is actually connected to this way in a way that people may not expect, but I hope we're revealing some of that with this show.
Yeah, I hope so too. I mean, I don't even know what to say. I mean, there was a couple times during this conversation I was thinking like, we're done. We did it. There's nothing more to say. And then we kept talking. I was like, okay, no, we still have more to talk about.
There's a lot of facets to this whole thing. And I don't know whether we'll ever cover them all. I don't know whether that's even possible, but I just love sharing ideas with different people. And they don't have to be aligned with my ideas, Mike. Like I'd be more than happy for maybe we could have an atheist on the show one time talking about UAPs. That'd be amazing, just to remove that whole layer.
That would be very interesting, actually. If there are, calling all atheists, if you want to join the conversation for real, that would be quite interesting to have a discussion about.
Yeah, so I'm trying to avoid any sort of confirmation bias. And I know I'll bring some of my friends on the show to talk about certain things, but it's good to have people with opposite perspectives or completely out of left field perspective, which I haven't considered. So I'm definitely open to that.
Likewise. Absolutely. Anyone out there, you can reach us. It's pretty easy on the YouTube page. I'm pretty sure is we've got our email there. You can also go to the website, universaldisclosurepodcast.com. There's a contact form there, and reach on out. And we go all over the place. Clearly.
Well, I also like that we let our guests talk. Now I know Reverend David can really talk, and I love that aspect about him because I can listen to him all day. But if you do come on the show, we're going to give you lots of space to talk and share your ideas, as you can see. And we're all ears with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes I somebody, and it's not just in this conversation, but other conversations too, or someone's saying something, and then I almost want to interrupt, but I don't because out of respect, and I want to hear the whole thought too. And then it's just like we go so far from where I wanted to go back, and I got to try to bring it back in and toss that question out. But I mean, that's one of the things too with my investigations. I let people tell me the whole darn story first, and then I'll ask the questions afterwards, because I want to not interrupt the train of thought and hear everything that needs to be said.
Well, that's very interesting. I didn't realize that. So you're bringing that same approach and lens to this show. Now, there's very little that we cut out. I'll just mention this too. So some sort of editorial parts where if there's a technical glitch or we end up speaking at the same time. But for the most part, you're hearing the whole conversation. And I really like that, Mike.
Yeah, absolutely. With a couple exceptions, because we always present the conversation to the guest first before it goes live. It's happened a couple times where we've been asked to remove some stuff for various reasons, and we always do. But that's how we operate here.
I like that. So I'm partly mentioning this for anyone else who's coming on the show. And I was serious about the atheist perspective because I've got a lot of respect for atheism. You might be surprised to know. So if someone's out there who's interested in the UAP topic and they are an atheist, I'd be definitely interested. And also people from other religious traditions as well, Mike. I'm open to all that.
Yeah, maybe things will change. I did reach out to some a fair amount of people in the beginning days, and didn't get much of a response back. But you never know. Now that we've sort of put ourselves out there and established, you get the vibe and all that stuff. We welcome a lot of things, not necessarily anything, but overwhelming majority, I think.
Fantastic. I'd definitely like to try that again.
Yeah, so we'll have to look into that. Well, as always, thank you for joining us on this journey. Hope you enjoyed this conversation. Drop us a comment. Let us know what you liked about it. Or, I don't know, if you didn't like it, maybe keep that to yourself, right? I'm just kidding. Anyways, smash the like button, share it. We do appreciate all the shares. And, we'll see you back here real soon.
Thank you. Much love to you all.
Take care.